Season 1 of The Making of You with Deante Young is presented by Right. One thing I always say is that all of us, in our young years, we have parents and grandparents that give us quotes that we live by. My grandmother always said, "One monkey don't stop no show." And,
Amen.
and that empowers me.
Yes.
What type of quotes, things that you remember from your parents or anyone that was in your formative years that still guides your decisions to this day?
God is good.
Yeah.
You are God's child. We are children of God.
Yeah.
And not so much in word, but in deed, they lifted up a standard of dignity, a standard of spiritual and moral values. I have mentioned it many times. When I was a child, we were all at home. We remember that day when our father left home to vote. And we were just excited. See our father dressed up and going to vote.
Yeah.
He was going to vote for something, and he was also going to vote against something.
Yeah.
He was voting for himself and for us and for our future, and voting against racism and a terrible governor in Georgia.
Otis Moss Jr., activist, advocate, author, theologian, pastor, advocate for so many people. He has been a global phenomenon, but more importantly, a great leader in the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King was one of his proteges and vice versa. But what I found great about him is that his God-fearing qualities. And when you have that, you can impact anybody. What are the earliest memories of the world that you have?
In my childhood days, when you ask some of the early memories, growing up in the rural South in Georgia, in a family of 5 children, I had 4 siblings, a marvelous mother and father. Our mother died at a very young age, the age of 36. And my father, as I have repeated often, became a single parent with 5 children. He never remarried. And fast forward a little more than a decade following the death of our mother, our father was killed in an automobile accident.
Wow.
So there were 5 children without parents. But as the scripture says, I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. We experienced that. So as I was standing beside the automobile, the wrecked automobile where my father had been killed, I felt an arm around my shoulder and a beautiful neighbor with tears in her eyes and tears flowing from my eyes. And she put her arm around me and said, "That's your father." And I didn't say anything. My tears were speaking for me. And then she said, "You can come home with me." as long as I live, you have a place to stay.
Wow.
And to have that experience at age 16, a junior in high school, one giant door opened, or closed rather, and a giant gateway opened. So I lived with her and her family for the next year, which was my senior year in high school, and then off to college with a few nickels and dimes and a borrowed trunk filled with a few clothes.
Right.
I moved on to Morehouse College, and when they gave the reception for freshmen, the president of the college, the late Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, held a reception on his front lawn to welcome freshman students. And the unusual thing, or the unique thing here is, only in the HBCUs, the black colleges, could you establish that relationship. Here we are in a reception on the lawn of the president's residence, being welcomed to the college by the president and the first lady of the college. That kind of experience in black education is beyond words.
Wow. Season 1 of The Making of You with Deante Young is presented by Buy Right. Buy Right is proud to be the only Eastside showroom for both new and used office furniture. Additionally, they offer over 35,000 office products for next day delivery. They are locally owned and operated. Please visit buyrightoffice.com.
I went back to Morehouse a few days ago for my 70th graduation year.
God bless you.
Now, I witnessed, and fast forward years afterward, years later, I was privileged to serve for 10 years as the chair of the board of trustees of that same college. When I returned several days ago to witness the graduation of 578 young African American men from that same college. Now, guess what? My graduation class was about 100 students. The total student body in my day was about 600.
Wow.
A few days ago, the graduating class was 578.
Unbelievable.
And that verse constantly comes back from Scripture. I would have fainted unless I had believed in the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. To me, that's not poetic scripture. It's a testimony.
Yes.
Of my journey and the journey of so many others.
The thing that I find to be so amazing is you had those very difficult moments happen when you were in a very young child with your parents. And my question is, how can you see a path forward when you don't have the guidance that you should have at that point?
The dangers that many children and families of the same age face today, maybe even the tragedy, is that as challenging as our circumstances were, we were in community.
Yeah.
And that community became literally an enlarged family. And the pillars in that family constituted one's family, church, school, and neighborhood, surrounded by vicious hostility. When you got out on the road to walk from house to house, or from house to school, or from your place in the rural to the city, you were always in danger. And I mean that literally.
Is this is the South you were born in?
Indeed.
What city and state?
LaGrange, Georgia,
Okay.
about 65 or 70 miles from Atlanta.
We're talking about the Deep South when Black people were considered 10th class citizens. I don't say second class.
Absolutely.
So I can't even imagine that childhood. Were you aware of the racial strife going on at the time?
Absolutely. You met it 24/7. When I was in high school, I lived in the rural area, and I walked 6 miles one way to get to high school. My older sister, who had already graduated, bargained with a family she worked for, and she is now in eternity, but I still thank her, and provided me a bicycle, a used bike, to ride to and from school. And guess what? One night, when I was riding my bike on my way home, a group of white men chased me off the road. I jumped into a ditch, trying to avoid being hit by the automobile, and I was safe. But they ran over my bike.
Wow.
And here I am now back walking. The bike was damaged beyond repair. But it's amazing what you can do even as a child or as a teenager. I knew every Black person in the community who had an automobile. And I knew where they worked and what time they would be on the road. So I would get on the road walking to school knowing that there were adults, Black adults, generally male, going to and from work. And I was always sure that I would catch a ride by one of those few individuals in the neighborhood who had an automobile. And it worked well until the accident with my father, and then when I went to live with neighbors, they had automobiles, so I had another door open while another door was closed.
Yeah. That's incredible, because I know in all of our childhoods, on some level, we all experience some form of child abuse, whether it's physical, psychological, sexual, or even just hearing your parents argue all the time. Now, did you ever have to deal with any of that inside your household, to go outside and feel like that was freedom?
Fortunately, I did not. Our parents were loving individuals. They were disciplinarians, but it was discipline with dignity and love.
Yeah.
And when you experience that in your early years, it does something special, positive, moral, and spiritual to your mind and your spirit.
Yeah.
So I still utter prayers of thanksgiving for my parents, although I did not have them as long as I would wish that I had had them. But they left a legacy that lives with us, their 5 children, every day.
What is that legacy?
A legacy of love, a legacy of faith, a legacy of dignity, a legacy, to borrow a phrase, a legacy of somebodyness. In all of those cruel circumstances, we knew that we were loved. We were given a sense of purpose and a sense of dignity. And that racism cannot erase. It lives with you, shall I say, because of, in spite of. And when your parents and loved ones have passed on, it lives with you in memory of.
Yeah.
And that is something, unfortunately, that many children miss in their formative years. And even a lifetime cannot make up for that.
Yeah.
No matter how many people reach out, you can overcome it, but you cannot make up for a missed meal.
Yeah.
Or a year of neglect, or the Jim Crow years.
Oh man, Jim Crow.
You cannot repair that which is irreparable, but you can move in spite of it.
That's true.
And that's the lesson I think we have to try to pass on from generation to generation.
Yeah. This week's episode of The Making of You with Deante Young is presented by Positive Plus. It's an organization grounded in inspiration, motivation, personal growth, and self-esteem development. Go to YvonnePointer.com. One thing I always say is that all of us, in our young years, we have parents and grandparents that give us quotes that we live by. My grandmother always said, "One monkey don't stop no show." And,
Amen.
and that empowers me.
Yes.
What type of quotes, things that you remember from your parents or anyone that was in your formative years that still guides your decisions to this day?
God is good.
Yeah.
You are God's child. We are children of God.
Yeah.
And not so much in word, but in deed, they lifted up a standard of dignity, a standard of spiritual and moral values. I have mentioned it many times. When I was a child, we were all at home. We remember that day when our father left home to vote. And we were just excited to see our father dressed up and going to vote.
Yeah.
He was going to vote for something, and he was also going to vote against something.
Yeah.
He was voting for himself and for us and for our future, and voting against racism and a terrible governor in Georgia. And we were rejoicing and celebrating. Our father walked almost 20 miles
Wow.
and was denied at each place the right to vote. He came home burdened and saddened, but he passed on to us a legacy.
Yeah.
And I have said many times, each time I go to the poll to vote, I hear my father's footsteps.
Wow.
And the sound of those footsteps, that sound is more than enough to say to me that voting is not a light thing. It's a life obligation.
Yeah.
And I wish I could communicate that to every child, every man, and every woman, especially in the African American community.
One thing I really admire about Reverend Moss is that he's able to look at everything from a very intellectual perspective, but he also has no tolerance for fools. He doesn't suffer fools. And you know, the thing about race in this country has always been sort of like a noose around the neck, so to speak, and, you know, literally and figuratively, because it's easy to feel like you are hated in the country in which you were born. Did you ever feel that being Black was a hindrance or a negative because of how some of the white people treated us?
Unfortunately, I did not inherit that kind of legacy. Long before the phrase "Black is beautiful," our parents and our neighbors taught us,
Yeah.
you are God's child. You are special. You are a gift. And it's up to you to do well, to take what you have and make the best of it. And you know that unity, we experience that unity, as I have tried to reference earlier, that unity of family, church, school, community is something that many young people in massive metropolitan urban areas do not experience. And that makes a difference.
Yeah. Was there anything you were fearful of or insecure about during those early years, especially with the things that happened with your parents? You know, all of us, we seem to go through something like that. Or was it different for you?
That was always, we were always aware of the fact that we were living in a community of hostility. But there was another community, which was a community of faith, hope, love, expectation, and possibility.
Yeah.
And that community, that moral community, was more powerful than that racist,
Yeah.
hostile community.
Yeah. I've come to realize that some of the really great leaders of the 1950s and 60s were just a rare breed that we'll never see again, because the level of sacrifice, the level of commitment and focus it takes to do some of the things that Moss and others have done is astounding, and I personally can't even relate to it. Did you have anyone that was like, whether it was someone on television that was like a mentor or you that inspired you or even a book that you read as a young kid?
Good question. One, we had loving neighbors. And in those days, whatever you were running short of in your house, there was a neighbor that had an extra supply in their house.
Yeah.
So there was this true community. And in spite of the dangers and the hostilities that were external, there was an internal support system, an internal system of inspiration. And I repeat, it was found in our home, in our neighbors, in our church, and in our school, where even though the school was not well supplied, we had great teachers, and I mean that literally. Great teachers. So those great teachers took what was not enough and supplemented it with their greatness and their dedication and their preparation. In high school, all of our teachers were extraordinarily prepared. And a part of that preparation, in a sense, was, interestingly enough, kind of forced upon them. They could not attend colleges and universities except for black colleges and a university known as Atlanta University, which is still thriving. But the state of Georgia, and I suppose other states as well, would pay the tuition and other expenses for black educators to go to school outside of the state. We called it up north. So our teachers, professors, and counselors, after graduating from the marvelous HBCUs, the historically black colleges, universities, they went away often during the summer to study at places like Case Western Reserve, Columbia University, New York University, and other schools outside of the South. Many of them went to Atlanta University in the city of Atlanta. So they received an education, in my opinion, and I think it's a solid opinion, they received an education superior to their white counterparts. And the state of Georgia, as other states in the South, the state of Georgia was so determined to keep Jim Crow, apartheid, alive that they paid, I repeat, for these black educators to go outside of the South to get their master's degrees. Wow. Not knowing or not intending to create a family of educators, a cohort of educators, that a cohort that was superior to what was found in the white community. So they took less than enough and achieved excellence and greatness, and to whatever extent possible, shared that with their young black students, for which we must be forever grateful.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, I know that the Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1954, and what were your thoughts on that, and what do you feel that it did for this country?
I was a student at Morehouse College when that decision was handed down. And fortunately, for 2 years or more leading up to that decision, there was a fervent discussion and debate, formally and informally, about the possibilities of that decision. And then the week that the decision was handed down, the president of our college, in a special session in chapel, talked about the significance of the decision and encouraged us to go out and buy a newspaper where we could read the entire text of the decision, and even encouraged us to save that paper. Some of us tried to, but they got lost along the way, but you can always pull it up.
Yeah.
So that decision was the end of an era and the beginning of a new era. But when I say it was the end of an era, I don't mean it was the end of the era of hate and racism. It was the end of a legal form of racism.
Wow.
And separate but equal became illegal. But the practice, the resistance, continued.
Yeah.
Mobs gathered in various places to keep us out of the desegregated schools. And then we discovered that the challenge was not just a Southern challenge. It was nationwide.
Yeah.
And before America was willing to embrace that decision to its fullest extent, they won in the South and the North, resisted that decision. And out of that resistance, private schools were born. And in some instances, like in the state of Virginia, schools were closed. And even to this very hour, the resistance to that decision and the results of that resistance, those results are still with us. America, to some extent, turned its back on public education at the elementary and high school level. And we are now living with, in almost every community, school systems that are being defunded or inadequately funded.
Yeah.
And charter schools are getting money, in my opinion, that should be going to public education.
Yeah.
And you have people fleeing cities, inner cities, and going to other areas of the country and suburban areas in order to get away from equal desegregated education. That's a whole story that needs to be constantly discussed and analyzed. because the 1954 Supreme Court decision, as great as it was and as necessary as it was, also had what shall we call it, a resistance that has never stopped. And to some extent, to a large extent, public education is being, in my opinion, defunded rather than appropriately funded. And all of America, knowingly or unknowingly, is suffering from this neglect.
One thing that I really liked about Moss is that he has a great sense of self, but he's not egotistical or arrogant. He understands his value to the world, and he understands that it's not about him, it's about we, and it's about lifting all of us up. And that's what I think a lot of the old time kind of people really understood, you know, people that was born in the early 1900s and even before that. And I feel that Moss is a great person just to even be in his presence. I mean, he is, of course, very graceful, and he has an astoundingly brilliant way of thinking. But beyond all that, I feel like it's great to learn from this man.
Something else happened also in that process. I heard an educator talking about what happened in his community when the desegregation process took place. They shut down the black school, and all the trophies, all of the awards that were on the wall, all of the photographs, and all of the signs of encouragement were thrown in the trash can. And black children went to predominantly white schools where there were no images, no symbols, no inspirational art and messages, except maybe on the athletic field. So it is amazing. You talk about snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. We experience, to a large extent, in public education, just the opposite. We experience the snatching of defeat from the halls of victory. And if you look at the history of our nation from 1954 down to this very hour, there was a segment of the nation that turned against the United States Supreme Court. And they fought the Supreme Court until they were able to get what is now a Trump Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And that Trump Supreme Court that didn't start with Trump, really started with Nixon. That court that was once a guarantor of constitutional rights has taken the opposite turn, and it will take, I don't know how many decades to overcome the damage that the Supreme Court is now casting upon America in general and black people in particular, because they are killing the Supreme Court I'm talking about. They are killing civil rights and human rights, and the victories won during the period that you have referenced.
Yeah. You talk about civil rights. I feel that the civil rights movement really started when Rosa Parks had her moment on the bus in December 1955. I know that you became a very, very deep supporter and participant in the civil rights movement. And just tell me about how that came about and what you learned from it.
Dr. King once referred to the 1964 Supreme Court decision as a joyous daybreak after a long and tragic midnight. The courageous act of Rosa Parks and the birth of the Montgomery protest became a turning point in the human rights struggle in our nation. And fortunately, under the leadership of a prophet named Martin Luther King Jr. And it needs to be stated and restated and taught and retaught. 50,000 black people in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, refused to ride the bus for 381 days. And at the end of that 381 days, the black community was stronger and more united than on day one.
And this was because of the Rosa Parks
Yes,
situation.
absolutely. Not only that, but this movement in Montgomery inspired movements throughout the South and the North.
Oh, I didn't realize it was in the North as well. Wow.
Yes. The Freedom Rides that came in 1961, the sit-in movement that broke out starting in 1960, all of these were tied into what we had seen and felt and experienced from the Montgomery movement. Young people joined the movement and became a part of, and leaders and demonstrators and persons willing to go to jail and suffer, all growing out of that. So that was a national movement that was born, and it changed the nation for a moment until the opposition forces had a chance to regroup, reorganize, and strategize. And their organizations and strategies, I say starting in 1968, elected Richard Nixon as President of the United States. And from that moment on, the personnel, the members of the Supreme Court, were changed down to the point that we now have a Donald Trump court.
Yeah.
And that court, in my opinion, is anti-minority, anti-African American, anti-democracy. I make bold to state, in my opinion, because they have this 6-member majority, 6 out of 9, on the Supreme Court. And that majority has damaged democracy, in my opinion, in the United States of America. That 6-3 majority vote at the Supreme Court has well nigh gutted civil rights legislation and the voting rights legislation and the human rights tenor of the United States government. That court, the court that we now have in session at this very hour, is more like the Supreme Court of 1896 than the world of 2026.
I mean, it sounds unbelievable, but I can definitely believe it. Definitely believe it. At some point, you did come up to Cleveland. Is this when did you come to Cleveland from down south?
Well, I first came to Cincinnati, always maintaining a close relationship with the South, and then went back to Georgia for a short time, but always maintained connections with organizations and with my school, and with people that I attended college with, served in various community endeavors, and then in 75, I accepted the assignment to be pastor of the Olivet Institutional Baptist Church right here in Cleveland.
Right.
But I have always maintained a strong connection with my home state, school, and friends and colleagues and alumni and alumni of the various schools. So there has been a distance, but not a separation.
When I think about the relationships that Moss has had in his lifetime, I'm really, really blown away because not only was he helpful to them, but they were helpful to him. And as a result, he was able to use his influence for a much larger purpose. And I think that's why I always say formation over accomplishments, and the relationships that you build is great, but the relationships that build you is even better. At what point did you meet the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King? What year was that?
I met Dr. King in 1955.
Oh, so it was right during the Rosa Parks.
I met his family when I entered Morehouse in 1952, before the Montgomery movement.
Okay.
Met all of his family, and I met him personally in 1955, before the Montgomery protests began. And because of our relationship and friendship with the family, that became a growing circumstance, most positive and blessed. And in college, Dr. King's younger brother was a student at Morehouse at the same time that I was a student there. I got to know the King family because Dr. King Sr., Daddy King, was a member of the Board of Trustees. So with that connection, we became friends, and the King family and my family became a beautiful relationship. And later on, I met a young lady who was on the staff at SCLC, who became my wife following the death of my first wife. And Edwina and I have now been married. We'll be 60 years in July. And Dr. King performed the ceremony. So that has been a tremendous relationship.
Wow. So your wife, Edwina, you guys were married by Dr. King. That's
correct.
Now, just so you know, that's a flex. That's what the kids today would say. That's a flex to get married by Dr. King. So, what did you think of him? Did you see that you guys had a common philosophy on just the betterment of people and lifting up people, or did you see him as something that was a little bit different from you?
Number one, I can say with great gratitude and humility, we were friends. He was our prophetic leader. a great friend and a great leader. And we respected him and related to him in that sense. We were joyous regarding the friendship. As I referenced earlier, my wife, Edwina, was on the staff of SCLC for 5 years. That's where we met. And actually, we saw Dr. King and his family, Dr. King Sr., Daddy King, and Mama King, as extended family.
Now, when you say the SCL, you're talking about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference?
Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Okay. So what was it like being with him when you were out there just trying to better everyone? Because I know that you were a part of Bloody Sunday. Was that?
I was not present for that, but I did join the march later.
So what is that like? Because if it were me, I feel that I would be terrified because a white supremacist might come up to me and try to assassinate me, especially when we're talking about they were already doing that to people like Medgar Evers and all these other people. So how did you get the courage to march in that type of climate?
To some of us, that was a duty. It was a calling. It was a commitment. It was a moral assignment. So that was not, for some of us, that was not a question of should we be involved, but how can we not be involved? And Dr. King was a prophetic, moral leader, one of the most prepared leaders on the planet. And it was not a position that he sought.
Yeah.
In the words of the late Dr. Mays, it was thrust upon him.
Yeah.
He was called to the position and accepted it with grace, dignity, courage, and suffering.
Wow.
From the moment he accepted that responsibility, his life was in danger 24/7.
Yeah.
Until finally, the fatal bullet in Memphis, Tennessee, brought an end to his physical life. But I say, even with that, his spiritual life and leadership continued to grow.
Yeah. You know, it is of my opinion that the famous March on Washington from August 1963 was kind of the beginning of the end in a sense, because it seemed like people were hating the fact that he was getting so much power. And recently people here in Cleveland told me that when he came to Cleveland, that a lot of the pastors and reverends, they would be jealous of him because of his national profile elevating. What do you think about the jealousy surrounding Dr. King when he was just really trying to be a peacemaker?
Let me give you an example. When Dr. King moved or relocated from Montgomery back home to Atlanta, the governor of Georgia called a press conference and announced that he was not welcome. I mean, an open press conference. And many black people, unfortunately, in Atlanta, did not embrace him. You know what? Dr. King's greatest reception in Georgia came on April 9th, 1968, at his funeral. 100,000 folk assembled and marched. We were in that march. I carried a wreath. And his funeral was held on the campus of Morehouse College with Dr. Mays, the former president of Morehouse, giving the eulogy. I repeat, 100,000 or more people gathered.
They didn't even do that for President Kennedy.
No. But when he moved to Atlanta to become co-pastor with his father, the reception in the community was somewhat cold. Atlanta was even slow to celebrate his award of the Nobel Peace Prize until a few people, including the Coca-Cola Company, stepped up. And some have told me that they even sent word to the powers that be that we do not have to have our headquarters in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the folk who were slow to recognize this Nobel laureate became a part of the celebration.
Yeah.
But on the night of the tribute, Dr. King, in his acceptance speech or in his remarks, thanked everybody. I was not present. My present wife was present and a part of the planning. He thanked them for the celebration of his receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said something to the effect of that, I'm on the mountain tonight, or we are on the mountain, but I've got to return to the valley. Selma is calling.
Wow.
Selma is calling. I must go from this mountain to the valley. So he went from the celebration of receiving the Nobel Peace Prize to the dangerous Selma to Montgomery march for voting rights.
I'm still mind blown that Otis Moss Jr. had a great friendship and relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And when I think about the assassination of King in 1968 and Moss being there at the time, Moss would have been 33 years old. And I'm blown away by it because it was such a transformative period in history that still rings to this day. And Moss has essentially carried on that burning torch that Dr. King had to leave off in Memphis.
These are statements of Dr. King 30 days after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. That was his commitment. And then that dangerous walk from Selma to Montgomery, where people died. On the night of the end of the march, I happened to have been on the plane that Dr. King was on, going from Montgomery to Atlanta and from Atlanta to Louisville. And a reporter got off the plane in Birmingham, I guess, to call into his office to give an update. It came back on the plane and announced that Mrs. Viola Craig Luzzo had been killed going from Montgomery back to Selma, transporting march participants. There are no words to describe. Now here, 50,000 people gathered in Montgomery pushing for the voting rights bill. And a person participating in that process is murdered. On the day of the march, the day of the conclusion of the march. However, President Johnson literally put his political career on the line and stood with, for, and supported the voting rights bill. And we got it passed. However, we now have a president and a Supreme Court that is a president and Supreme Court. Both of them are opposed to equal rights and liberation at the polls. A president who has shown in every way possible his opposition, in my opinion, to human rights and civil rights, and a Supreme Court, majority Supreme Court, 6-3, a court that endorses Trumpism, rather than, in my opinion, democracy.
Now, I know that you ultimately got into, the ministry, and you've been a speaker, you've been, a world traveler, you've been an author, and being a reverend. My question to you is, all of those things that you experienced during the course of the most hateful time of the past century, do you think that had any type of connection to you becoming a part of the ministry, or was it just a natural extension of what your parents taught you about faith? Just wondering about that.
I knew from the time that I was 4 years old that I had a calling to ministry. I did not talk about it until I was 17. And in the language of our elders, there came a moment when I could not keep it to myself alone. And once I revealed it to one of my highly regarded elders in the ministry, who informed me to share it with my pastor, both of whom supported and encouraged me. And I shall never forget the first minister I talked with about a call to the ministry. I was 17, on my way to Morehouse College. He said something to me that I will never forget, and I've tried to pass it on to other women and men who who feel a call to ministry. He said to me, a call to ministry is a call to preparation.
Yeah.
That's step number one. And then he took time to outline some of the basic steps academically, as well as morally and spiritually in preparation. I have never forgotten that, and I've tried to pass that on to others. And I am indebted to those individuals who gave me guidance and counsel in those early years when I acknowledged a call to ministry. And I've tried to pass it on for these 70 plus years to all who come to me for advice, or to those that I have the privilege of counseling, of ordaining, of welcoming into the ministry.
What do you think is your greatest skill?
Interesting question. I think it's that of embracing people, individuals, especially those who are younger, to follow their dreams, but make sure that you have dreams worthy of following.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. I want to kind of put a bow on this. I can talk to you forever. I'm going to have to come to your house and talk to you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I want to ask you this last question. What do you want your enduring legacy to be?
In simple terms, love, struggle, faith, hope, liberation, and the embrace of younger generations, and holding the hands of elders and those of my generation, that he tried to lay a path of excellence and liberation for those who will follow.
Wow. That's powerful.
Thank you.
Just so you know, you have shined a light on us so tremendously, and I can't thank you enough. But I will try to find a way to thank you enough, and I will fail.
Thank you. And in the language of our elders, keep on keeping on.
Oh, absolutely. That's a mic drop. My enduring thoughts about Reverend Otis Moss Jr. is that he is a national treasure. As a matter of fact, an international treasure. I say that not because of what he accomplished, but what he was able to do for the world. Because it's rare that someone comes along and has to deal with so much in such a long life and yet give even more to the people that he is brought here to serve. You know, Otis Moss Jr., he's a servant leader, and he's an icon not because of accomplishments, but because of what he has poured into thousands, tens of thousands of us. It was an honor and a great blessing to have been in his presence. And I have to say, Reverend Moss, I love you and thank you.